Welcome to the International UFO Museum and Research Center. My name is Don Schmitt, one of the founders of this facility. In 1947, a craft of unknown origin reportedly came down 65 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico. Base personnel stationed south of town at the Roswell Army Airfield were notified within days of the extraordinary event. Military officers were dispatched to immediately investigate, and on July 8, 1947, a press release was released by the Roswell Army Airfield stating they had actually captured a flying saucer. Now, I was a skeptic. I had worked for the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the consultant to the Air Force Project Blue Book for 19 years. He was their resident debunker, their skeptic. He was always called in to investigate and then give a counter explanation to what was being reported by eyewitnesses.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek is one of the most important figures in this matter. As a senior government representative, he faithfully continued to dismiss all UFO sightings as swamp gas, mass hallucinations, temperature inversions, and conventional aircraft until Blue Book was terminated in 1969.
I would become his Director of Special Investigations, and then I served also on his Board of Directors for 10 years. He founded the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago in fall of 1973. And then he too became fascinated with Roswell. In fact, after he passed away in 1986, we found handwritten notes where he was investigating, he was interviewing some of the ranchers out in that region who were telling him about this strange event. But the one case we wanted to investigate was right here. We thought we would come to New Mexico and in a single weekend wrap this up, that we would prove it was a balloon, as the government still maintains, or something just as prosaic, just as conventional. And here we are, almost 30 years into our own independent investigation. We've written 15 books on the subject, 6 of them bestsellers. Our book, Witness to Roswell, was the #1 selling UFO book in the world for 2 years, which has also been optioned for the next feature film. We've had 5 archaeological digs at the crash site, trying to still find physical evidence. But I believe most interesting, most amazing of all, we've interviewed over 600 people, either directly or indirectly involved as to what transpired here back at that time. The government is presently up to 4 official explanations regarding this incident. I often joke that husbands should try that with their wives when they come home too late some night. But yet the government is standing on the balloon explanation, albeit Project Mogul, which was a Russian spy balloon back in 1947. The thought was that when the Soviets would detonate their first atomic bomb, which they eventually did in August of 1959, that we would pick up the shock wave in the upper atmosphere. So it was a balloon, cluster balloon with an array of radar reflector kites and a microphone, an acoustic listening device that still serves as the official explanation after all this time. But what do the witnesses say? What do the witnesses describe right up to their very deathbeds regarding the very nature, the characteristics of the material? They describe paper-thin, practically weightless-like material that you would hold in your hands, and yet you had no feeling of anything being in your hands. There were I-beam structures with symbology that ran the lengths of these struts, with hieroglyphic-like symbols that ran the length of each piece. There were silken strands of material like microfilament, like fishing line. You'd hold the lighter up to one end, and the light would emit out the opposing end. And then the most amazing material of all, the same type of paper-thin-like material that you couldn't cut, you couldn't burn, even a bullet wouldn't penetrate. But this you could crease, you could fold, you could wad up into a ball. And when you would place it down, it would flow like water. It would smooth right out and return to its original shape and size right before your eyes. So hardly sounds like a weather balloon of any sort. It hardly sounds like any type of material that we even have by today's standards. Yet this is the very testimony, the descriptions that we have regarding just the material. And then we have the accounts of the little bodies, the little men as they were described. They didn't use the word alien. They didn't call them spacemen. But as one of the personnel stationed here at the base in 1947 commented, they sure weren't from Texas. So they knew what they were dealing with. And there was nothing in the Army field manual that they could, reference, that they could, as far as refer to. And so they found that they had to deal with this not only with the utmost caution, because this was totally unprecedented, but they also had to keep the prying press and the other civilians out of the entire picture. There was outside personnel that came onto the base at Roswell. There were special flights that came in and went out transporting wreckage and remains. There were strange doctors and nurses never seen before that took over the base hospital. Everything suggested that something big had happened. And after that press release, sad to say that 5 hours later, the government put out another press release. They had a press conference. They claimed that what now had crashed in reality was not a craft of unknown origin, a flying saucer from off the earth, but rather a weather balloon of neoprene rubber, a radar reflector kite of wooden sticks, reflective foil, masking tape, and string, baling twine. Yet there was a full-scale operation going on north of town here. 50 to 60 troops would spend the next 3 days gathering up every last shard of evidence that would prove that this was something, again, beyond the earth, beyond the pale as far as the human experience. And that story would then stand for the next 30 years, that it was nothing more than a weather balloon device. The intelligence officer, then Major Jesse Marcel, the highest intelligence officer in the military at that time, who was first assigned to investigate the crash, was also sadly to become the fall guy, the patsy. He was ordered to actually pose with the substituted weather balloon, but not at a press conference here in Roswell, but rather at Fort Worth, Texas, going up the chain of command at Carswell Army Airfield. There, the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard's boss, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, invited the press to actually see the material from Roswell. But they substituted this balloon for that actual material that was now on its way to Fort Worth and then Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio for testing and analysis. And so Major Marcel was ordered to pose with the substituted balloon. He became, as I said, the patsy, the fall guy. And he was told, Jess, it will all come out in 5-10 years. You'll be vindicated. You'll be a hero. The truth will finally come out. 15 years, 20 years, nothing. 30 years later, he's dying of emphysema. And he realizes it will not come out. It is not coming out. So he breaks his oath of secrecy. And he testifies, he states on the record, quote, being familiar with all materials, both foreign and domestic, this was nothing made on this earth, end quote. How much more profound can you get? How much more specific can you get? He held it in his hands. He knew up to the time he died that this was nothing that he had ever and would ever see again. And the floodgates would open. Not that people came forward, but the story broke. And as we enter the investigation 10 years later and have to date talked to hundreds of witnesses, as I mentioned, and they all have concurred, they all have corroborated the fact that in their eyes, in what they experienced, what they witnessed, this indeed was a genuine crash of a UFO, a craft of unknown origin with its crew. And if that wasn't enough, that there was one survivor.